live on Twitch. Let me check YouTube. Live on YouTube as well. Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about decisions to make when setting up a campaign. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you let folks know what it is we do on this podcast?
You know, on this podcast, we like to talk about games. We alluded to some of this, I guess. I've talked a lot in the back halves about sort of the D&D games that I'm in. I talk a lot about 7th Expedition, which is obviously the online game that I've been running for probably about a year at this point. But we're also, man, it's a year and they are still level 4. But we're also talking about the new game that I've set up. We're only like 2 or 3 sessions in. I actually think it's literally 2 sessions in, which is Shadowlands, Shadow of the Dragon Queen. I want to talk a little bit about the backstory because I think it's kind of important to how I sort of set this up. But then, you know, there's just this opportunity to sort of make a lot of changes because this is the first in-person game I've run since like 2014, you know, really long time, basically. We're like a dedicated in-person game. This is a big thing. So
before we get into it real quick, I'm just going to warn you that I see in the chat we have one Jackie Chan opera singer who I believe...
Yes, I did in fact advertise this to the group in the campaign chat. I will try to be keeping spoilers a little bit light. There's technically some stuff I'm going to talk about that reveals the mechanics behind things that I've been a little obtuse on. But... you know, I think that's fine. None of this is going to be spoilers, Buddy.
I just want to make sure that you knew that your players were in the chat.
Well, so the interesting thing is that, you know, this is an adventure path. So the story of this is that when I moved to New Hampshire, Sarian and Josh and a couple of our friends, we do this, you know, sort of boys' night thing. I immediately got invited to kind of the boys' night. The very first night we played the boys' night, we played this D&D board game called Warriors of Krynn, which is set in the Dragonlance D&D setting, okay? The board game was very cool. It's very fun. We got through a scenario. It's a very PvE sort of board game where you're like, it's a board gamification of sort of, you are a PC during a big battle. Here's the battle happening in the background. Here's, you know, the actions that you can do to sort of affect things and all that stuff. So it doesn't use real D&D rules, and it has some interesting design that maybe we can sort of, you know, whatever, sort of like talk about. But it does have an accompanying D&D campaign. And as we were playing, we were getting really into it. We were getting into like the lore of this board game, but there's no DM, there's no any of that kind of stuff. And immediately afterwards, I was just like, man, I actually really want to I want to play that campaign basically. And basically everybody just jumped at the opportunity, I guess because of, you know, sort of DM tax. Have you ever heard about DM tax? It's just like that nobody ever wants to DM, and so somebody has to pay the DM tax. I find this incredible because I love DMing, obviously. But like, you know, it is a thing I understand in sort of other D&D sort of circles, right? Most people don't enjoy DMing, but whatever. I'm a control freak. It's my life, I guess. And so we had a little session 0. We made some characters, you know, whatever. My initial plan for this campaign was I'll do a little bit that I've always wanted to do in an in-person campaign. We'll talk about some of those decisions. But I also was just like, I'm just going to run this one pretty much by the book. I don't want to get really crazy. I don't want to introduce a bunch of new lore and extra. This is what I always do with these games. Balloons them out of control, makes them way more work for myself. And then I find myself in kind of this half frustrating place of I'm running an adventure path in an essentially homebrewed kind of world. And I really just wish I was running in my home setting, right? You'll be surprised to learn that I added a bunch of extra lore and stuff, and have in fact fallen into this trap. But whatever, who cares? Okay, this game ends at level 12. It's not that hard. We're gonna sort of power through it. But I started making some of these decisions, and I ended up making this big, gigantic sort of thread that I then showed kind of the players because I just wanted to sort of like outline the kind of DM, the kind of like guy I am. And this is where I started kind of like making real decisions sort of about the game itself. Some of these are very specific to sort of like D&D like 2024. So the first thing I mentioned, for instance, is a second background. One of the things they did in D&D 2024 is they changed the way the races and backgrounds. You don't get ability scores from races, you get them from your background, right? If you're a soldier, you can put a +2 into strength. but if you're a acolyte, you can't, right? So the idea is that you're gonna kind of like mix and match, and you don't have to roll a, you know, like a dragonborn to get a plus on strength, or a half orc or something to get a plus on strength anymore. That kind of thing. I guess there are no more half orcs. There's no more half anything, but whatever the case may be. In the process of this, they got rid of some of the like the flavorful, you know, DM stuff that, or that like the flavorful background stuff. Did you ever, I mean, you played in your D&D
Yes.
5e game for the longest time. Did you use your background all the time?
Yeah, because I was an artisan mason, and my being a mason was central to my character.
Okay.
But like I would say the other characters not so much, right? Like if like my character's whole thing was being a mason, so that it entered more. But for the other characters, it wasn't as much of a thing. It was basically as much as we wanted to hang our hat on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really like the flavorful sort of things, right? You know, Mateo has one in Rachel's game. You know, you're acquainted with a network of smugglers who are willing to help you out in tight situations. While in a town, city, or other similar sized community, you and your companions can stay for free in safe houses, right? And I really love the idea that just any port in a storm, wherever you go, you can sort of access your criminal network to get like a location. There's no real player power in that, and for most of the 2014 versions of the player backgrounds, I didn't find all that much player power to be located in there. So I basically told everybody, I was like, hey, listen, just like kind of pick this second background just for the feature. You know, you don't get anything else. Just get that cool, flavorful feature that you get to use, you know. I even said at the very, I was like, also, if you're lazy and don't want to do that, fair enough. Like, you know. But then the big one was the tension pool. Now, you introduced me to the tension pool system. I don't even remember when, but as soon as I saw it, I was like, I want to use this. I want to use this so bad.
Yeah, I think I probably sent it along to you. So, the DM for my 5e game, Chris, he introduced me to the Angry GM, and I think right around when I started reading the Angry GM stuff, he was talking about the tension pool. I just thought it was so spot on. I think that's when I like passed it on to you, right? Because like that's like one of the big mechanics come out of the Angry GM that kind of like I think really works and has kind of stuck around in terms of like what people talk about.
Did you use it with your game with Chris?
He used something similar, but not quite as mechanically robust, if that makes sense.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm using the tension pool for my 7th expedition game. But in that game, it is all about sort of the overworld exploration, right? This is, you know, Kaya, the Cursed Continent, right? Like it's dangerous all around you. And basically the tension pool, you know, the tension pool leads to complications, and the complications are random encounters. And this is essentially how I'm sort of adjudicating the danger of it. And there's a bunch of other sort of mechanics. I sort of, as we clear out sort of the first kind of arc, which we're still in for 7th expedition. I'm such an insane person. Why do I run games like this? I will eventually talk about sort of the way the behind the scenes mechanics kind of work. But listen, that's the other game. So I added the tension pool for this one, and I'm really excited to use the tension pool specifically for like minute by minute exploration, right? You know, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, where you kind of have travel, which is sort of hour by hour, right? Or day by day. You have exploration, which is this kind of like minute by minute, you're just kind of moving around sort of like a scene or whatever. And then you have combat, which is second by second. I don't know. I think someone broke the game down in those terms to me, or I read a thing, or I watched a YouTube video or something. And I've been thinking a lot about that. And so right now, I have the tension pool, and I am integrating the tension pool sort of into that exploration element. And part of what I really like about it is sort of the perceivable consequence of how players approach, you know, encounters between fights and stuff like that. So for instance, in the Dragonlance game, the players snuck up on there's a farm, and there are a bunch of dragonborn or whatever, and half the party wanted to sneak and the other half wanted to just attack, and that both added a die to the tension pool because people were sneaking, and rolled the tension pool because people were, you know, sort of charging in kind of thing. And I felt like that was a really that's like a perfect sort of way to adjudicate how the tension pool works. They have rolled complications, but I don't have a table. This is one of the things the Angry GM included that I just sort of don't like. I think I like complications to be improvisational and reactive to sort of the moment by moment, because it's actually kind of hard to, I don't know, it's hard to adjudicate some of that stuff. But one of the other things that I do with the tension pool is certain people, like people individually, sort of roll the tension pool on their own. Do you know what I mean? If somebody makes a choice that triggers the tension pool, it's not me rolling it, they roll it, which is another aspect of it that's maybe a little feels bad, but I actually think pretty fun. So for instance, Savadar is playing a wild magic sorcerer. And so when he rolled the tension pool and rolled a complication, I hadn't rolled on the wild magic. I was like, "Are you a wild magic surge? Just triggers right now. Roll on the table, right?" Which I think is like a pretty perfect, way to incorporate the tension pool. And theoretically, I think some of the tension pool stuff should sort of happen on kind of a personal, I don't know, like a personalized level.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel like there's different times where it should mean different things, right? Like I think even I could probably pull up the article at some point, but I feel like the Angry Gem would even tell you, like, if there's one that makes sense, go with that one, right? Like, and that table's more there for like a time when maybe you just need something generic to happen, right? Like, you're going from like point A to point, from town A to town B, and it's relatively quiet, and something pinged, and there's nothing in particular. You just roll on the table and see, like, what kind. Because like I think some of them aren't even like real problems, right? They're like like an eerie breeze, passes through the camp at night, right? Like and nothing really there, but like maybe the players decide to do something with it, or it's just kind of like a tension building moment for the players, something like that.
yeah. So the interesting thing is, that also happened because they rolled on the tension pool and got a complication, and I was just like, it starts raining. Like, like that's like maybe the simplest iteration of the tension pool I could possibly think of. It materially changes quite a lot of the kind of conditions, and it really helps with sort of like atmosphere and all of this stuff, but it is triggered by kind of like an in-game decision. It's not random, which I think is, I don't know. I think that kind of stuff is interesting, I guess. I made the decision to include the tension pool a little bit more looking forward than where the game sort of starts. So the story of Shadow of the Dragon Queen is, and part of this is just like Dragonlance lore. Basically, in Dragonlance lore, Dragonlance is a very Lord of the Rings type setting. Magic is incredibly rare. The gods are super silent. All the rest of that kind of stuff. And there's this big thing, the War of the Dragon Queen or something along those sort of lines. Maybe the War of the Lance is what they call it or something. Basically, Tiamat, but Tiamat by another name, shows up and has this huge dragon army, and she's trying to take over the whole sort of planet. And this whole campaign is you're playing boots on the ground as that is sort of happening in this one particular area of the planet, with this one sort of city, and there are lore characters and kind of all the rest of it. But that's the core of sort of like the setting and the idea for the stuff. And what I really like doing is having a tension pool for sort of like mid-battle stuff, right? As stuff is happening, as you're acting in a battle in that exploration sort of phase, you're between combats. You're not rolling round by round anymore, but like you're in the middle of a fight and these kinds of things are happening. I think that there's like a lot of really sort of emergent stuff you can do essentially with the tension pool and with the kinds of decisions that players make. So that's mostly of why I chose to sort of add it. Do you feel like the tension pool belongs in every D&D game? I mean, I'm sure we're going to say no, but like most D&D games, would you just sort of blanket recommend the tension pool system to people?
I think in general, yes, right? Like I think it's a thing where I don't know that you need to, like, you got a fresh group of players, right? First time you ever play with them, you launch into it immediately. I don't know if that's necessarily there, but I think there's a version of it essentially where, if like, I think most player groups are like this, where you have a tendency to kind of like overanalyze situations before you go on, right? Like that's, I think, what's really good for breaking up the log jams for. And so I don't know that every group has those problems, right? But if your group does, then I think that's a good way to go about it.
The other thing I really love about the tension pool is it forces players to switch up their tactical decision making. This happens a lot in 7th Expedition. It hasn't happened so much in Dragonlance just because we've just started kind of thing. But in 7th Expedition, it's very common for the players to look at the tension pool and change their direction based on how full or how empty it is, right? When the pool is empty, you feel very free to do things. One of the things that adds to the tension pool in 7th Expedition, for instance, is foraging for food. If you just sit and eat your rations, cool, no worries, right? But if you forage, you're gonna add a die to the tension pool. And so that adds a little of the push-pull to it, right? Do I want to spend my resource gold on rations, or do I want to kind of spend time and add risk by foraging for the tension pool because that sort of things. Rachel is asking, should I add the tension pool to my Pirates game is the real question. I feel like yes, but I also feel like no. I feel like I would only really recommend the tension pool for a specific kind of GM with a specific sort of like the tension pool is a toolbox, and I think it has to be pretty specific to what you want to solve with it. And part of what I'm looking to kind of solve in both of these games is very specific and tactical of like, the danger that is represented at any individual moment that can manifest in, compelling unforeseen sort of ways. I also think it requires a particularly improvisational GM, which is not everybody, and is the kind of thing, if somebody were to tell me, if Nick were to come in and be like, should I use the tension pool, I would probably say no, because my bet is if you are a GM who is good at sort of structure and rigidity, the tension pool is actually not a great system. Is not a great system for that, is kind of what I would say.
I think I disagree only in the sense that I think Nick style doing would do well with like a table and using it in situations that are like meant to be kind of like mechanically benefited that way, right? Like I could see a version of Nick running it where we're doing a dungeon crawl, right? And we hit the 1 or the 6, I forget which way it canonically goes, on the tension pool, right? Nick rolls on the table. It's like, oh, a goblin scout has caught you has seen you, and he is running to go get the encounter from another room, right? Like, what do you guys do, right? Like that kind of thing.
It's sort of almost like what are the two? It's like simulationist versus maybe abstract.
Yeah, simulation versus abstraction is the term we usually talk about. That
yeah, like I think of myself as a pretty abstract. Well, I don't know. Maybe there's not the right frame for it. Basically, what I'm thinking is that when I'm thinking about the tension pool, I want to do things with the tension pool that further immersion, right? And the thing I don't like about the table is that the table has this opportunity. If I'm sort of stuck to the table, right? It commits me to things that I don't always think are immersive. So for instance, if I get the weather change complication, but the players happen to be exploring a cave, sort of doesn't matter. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's not something that adds to their immersion. But if I am following the simulationist kind of path, that's it. So I do use a table in Saran. This is answering a question from the chat. Delphas, don't you use a table in Saran? I do use a table for 7th Expedition, but that's because it includes the random encounter stuff, which is all pretty like rules based. So, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, so I actually think you're kind of wrong there in a certain sense, right? Like that,
really?
Getting a weather change when you're exploring a cave doesn't add to the immersion. I think it kind of it leads to the verisimilitude of the world, right? Like you're in the cave, you hear water pattering on the roof of the cave, or it sounds like it started to rain outside, right? That's a thing that happens, right? Like it helps make a world feel more lived in, I guess. Maybe it's not the right thing for a tension pool table, but I think there's something to be said for details in the world that just make it feel more like a real world than or that in addition to other things, right? A complication that's you're driving down the road and you run into a merchant caravan, right? Not necessarily a dangerous thing, not necessarily a conflict, but it's a thing you might experience out in a real lived-in fantasy world that you don't always have the opportunity to run into.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
I don't think I agree, but I do agree that's valid in a sense. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't personally I don't think I personally run my games sort of in that vein, maybe. But I see what you're saying. That, you know, fair enough, kind of thing. So I added the tension pool to the game. Another system, this is one that I would recommend to everybody, just because, frankly, I don't think the numbers make sense otherwise. I call this party advantage, party disadvantage. The thing I have grown to hate are everybody roll a perception checks. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what I do is I just say, there are opportunities where the whole party gets advantage or the whole party sort of gets disadvantage. And the way that that gets sort of adjudicated out is if there's a perception check, anybody in the party can notice it. 2 players, that's party advantage. 2 players in the party, typically the 2 best, but you could choose whomever, right? Get to roll that check. Nobody else does, kind of thing. And you get to take the better result. And then the disadvantage version of this would be like stealth. If everybody in the party is rolling stealth, well, really, this is sort of a failure. You know, for a perception check, if anybody passes, you all pass, kind of thing. For a stealth check, if anybody fails, you all sort of fail. So it would be the 2 lowest stealth mods who would sort of like roll for a stealth check. If I'm thinking kind of along those lines, I think this deals with this issue I have had, which is that everybody roll a perception check. Checks always pass because there's just so many rolls. Someone is bound to roll a 14 or a 16. And like, that's fine. But I think it's like, then it shouldn't even be a skill check. If that is the kind of skill check it is where everybody has to, you know, like they can't possibly fail it, great. But otherwise, I think it should just be part of the narration. Do you know what I mean? Nobody has to roll a skill check to just like see it under those sort of circumstances.
No, I get what you're saying, and I think there's a thing there. I don't know. I feel like I'd have to think about it think about it in terms of specific examples to know whether I totally agree with you. But I definitely get the thing you're going for there, right? Which is kind of like, I think you do miss a little bit of the kind of like, oh, you know, occasionally the guy who's actually really bad at things, bad at the thing, hits the check and like saves the day, even though he's kind of like, a dullard or whatever. And I think there's also kind of like a, like the kind of classic, a bonus feels better than a malice thing, where I think that feels better for a stealth check, right? Because it's not that like, because you get the opposite problem with the stealth check, right? It's like, oh, if everybody's rolling it, only one person needs to fail, right? And so like, it's maybe it's, so part of this is that, like, at least my experience with 5e is that it's actually a little bit easier to get around these problems because a lot of characters get kind of like 10-ups on certain things, right? Like in our 5e game, I feel like the Drow Ranger never failed the stealth check because he could always just like default to a 10. I don't remember. I think that was like a feat or something. And so he never had problems. The dwarf the character I was playing, the dwarf in like the big stone armor, had his own he was always the person that like would fail the stealth check if we had a group stealth check. But I think in something like Pathfinder, where it's a little bit harder to like get assurances, like the equivalent feat, and it's a little bit harder to make thing like assurance is not always, you don't always go for assurance as a player because you're locked out of certain bonuses there. Like it's almost always better to roll the roll, which I think is a problem, a specific problem with the skill thing. But I get what you're saying. I've thought about systems like this for what I would call knowledge checks, which are like, everybody roll a recall knowledge. It's like, no, what you do there is, at least in the way I've been thinking about doing this, is something like everybody, or at least, so in PF2E, you rolling to aid another is like a flat bonus on another one. Is the way I would like to do knowledge checks in a system like that is the people who are going to make the relevant roll, basically anybody who's like trained in the skill, right, gets to make the roll.
I do a lot of that, actually.
Yeah.
Which is outside of party advantage and disadvantage. But there are certain skill checks I only allow people who are trained to attempt. A lot of the time this is for knowledge.
Yeah.
But it is also sometimes for sort of like other things. So for instance, I'll do it for something like athletics. If I feel like, the athletics thing that's being asked is a particularly, I don't even want to say demanding, but just like complex sort of physical maneuver. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, you want to, run up the thing and then vault off the wall. Like you have to be trained in order to even attempt this level of thing. It happens quite a lot with sort of like knowledge checks, because like, part of what I'm getting at, especially for esoteric knowledge, is like there's no way that somebody who is just a passerby, like this triggers all the time in Seventh Expedition. Seventh Expedition is about this like discovery, right? They're encountering beastmen, but they don't really know how the beastmen work. They're learning new things. They're coming to an understanding of like the mechanics of burning blood as like a disease, all the rest of it kind of stuff. You can't just casually have a knowledge of esoteric beastman lore that would be hidden in some elven library somewhere. You have to be trained in history to have even been in the library to come across that lore in the sort of the first place. And so sometimes I will adjudicate that on just saying trained, untrained, basically.
Yeah, so I think this is an advantage of like the Pathfinder system, is like the thing you're talking about with like the athletic jump off the wall thing, right? Like, basically in Pathfinder, what you do is set the DC high enough. It's like, well, if you're untrained, you're not gonna, like, it's literally impossible for you to hit the DC, right? So like, there's no, and I, as GM, I would warn them. But for like knowledge checks, there's this problem that I run into sometimes where it's like, all right, so Steve the wizard and Joe the cleric are both trained in Arcana, but Steve the wizard has a higher bonus, right? So Steve is going to be the primary, and Joe is going to roll to assist. And the roll to aid another gets like an 18, and so he hits like a 25. It's like, oh, you get the +2 bonus, and then Steve the wizard rolls like a 4, and so like
this is what I like about party advantage, is you're not giving one person a better roll or double or anything like that. It's either of the two of you can hit it, and your roll on the D20 sort of like counts compared to an aid another, or a help action would be like the D&D 5e version of this, right? The help action gives another person advantage, which I also want to avoid. I want the second best person in the party to hit it sometimes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If like you're doing party advantage on a nature check or something, right? Maybe the druid doesn't get it, but the ranger does. And even if the ranger has a worse, whatever, check for it kind of thing.
Yeah. So I think the way I would like to, like, because this is me also talking about some of the things I would want to implement in a campaign that I ran, be something like everybody who is like in a position to make that check, everybody rolls like everybody rolls the Arcana check, and the person who gets the highest is the lead, and then everybody else who like hit like whoever at the end another check gets to add up to whatever like +2 probably maximum or something there, right? Like
yeah.
To aid the other. That way you don't get into this position where like because in my mind what's happening is like it's like do I know anything about this magical spell? It's like the people are standing together and like comparing notes and like bouncing ideas off of each other, right? And if that's what's happening, right? Whoever gets the breakthrough isn't necessarily super material, but I'd rather not like I think it feels really bad. Roll 20 on the A check, roll like a 3 on the actual check, and you missed the roll. And if you had done it the other way around, you would have hit it. That feels bad to me. So that's the way I want to do something like that.
Yeah, and also part of this is just the practical thing of you get out of the logjam of a bunch of people all going, oh wait, I'm sorry, what was that? Oh, you want me to roll it? Am I trained in nature? It's like all of that. I hate that so much. You know what I mean? By using party advantage, most of the time, almost never do I use disadvantage. Maybe it's like 90-10 kind of thing. You're almost always playing to characters' strengths, so they know. You know what I mean? If I go, I need a party advantage perception check. The person who trained themselves in perception and has a good perception is the person who's going to jump on that check to be like, yes, please let me roll. I want to hit it, kind of thing. Whereas, like if I'm not trained in perception, I can just kind of not worry about it, and you just get rid of that sort of sort of that impediment to the action, which I like a lot.
That makes sense. And I think that'll work for like, I'm going to say like 90% of cases. I do think you might occasionally hit a quarter case where it's like, I'm playing, like Smarty the Smarty Pants. And I made sure, like I optimized my character to put skill points in everything. And so every time I don't get to roll a skill check, I am kind of like not, doing what my character is good at, and I probably sacrifice some combat capability to do that kind of thing. So maybe you need to adjust for those kinds of cases, but you can also see that coming a mile off, right? Like you know that before you start the campaign, and so you can adjust adjust from there type of deal. Either tell the player not to do that, or be like, okay, I'm going to roll this party with.
Yeah, I also really love when players ask to roll checks. If a player, this is a secret. If a player ever fucking asks me, can I roll a blank check to do this? I'm almost always going to say yes to that. Do you know what I mean? Outside of something that really is sort of stretching kind of like what I would call sort of fundamentals of the game. You know, if somebody is asking me in good faith, rather than asking me to like substitute, you know, one check, like a better check for another, right? Like this is what I would call sort of a bad faith. Saying, well, I don't have athletics, but I do have acrobatics. Can I use my acrobatics to make this jump check? Would make me be like, no, most of the time, right? But part of this is also, you know, when somebody says, even if they're not trained in any of this stuff, when they go, the last time we fought the Beastmen, this thing happened or whatever. And, you know, last thing that's happened, you know, can I roll an Arcana check to understand this? You don't have to. You can be the dipshit of the party and still roll that Arcana check just because you, the player, thought of it. And I want to reward that behavior almost as often as possible, basically. I am not directly calling Lou out. I'm directly calling Nick out.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's what popped into my head
15 years ago. Nick was playing Rufus, the rogue, and Rufus argued with Mark for about 10 minutes to get the go ahead to use acrobatics to jump up the wall, and then I think tried to argue that set a precedent. that set a precedent that he could do that every time thereafter, which is another rule that I have. I'm just going to mention this one in passing. No rules that I make in the moment are transferable forward. You know what I mean? This is something I warned my players about. I was like, listen, if I let you kind of get away with something in one way, that's not me setting a precedent. It's always going to work that way, right? You know, it is always about sort of like the context of the, I don't know, the context of stuff, the context of the scene.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah.
Okay, the next thing, this one will take 5 seconds. I don't know if someone gave me this idea, and I love it so much. It's for PvP. I said my expectation is that we're all aligned in our goals, and it won't come up. But just in case it does, I do have rules for how I like to resolve PvP. The rule that I have is that the defender in a PvP action gets to just set their role. They get to just choose what their role is. So, like, if somebody attacks if I am whoever and I'm going to attack the rogue in the party, theoretically AC doesn't work this way, but I'll use the 3-5 example of it. Theoretically, they could just roll a 20 on their AC check to never get hit, or they'll roll or they'll always save, or they'll always see through. Do you know what I mean? If you try and lie to this person, right? If you try and say, oh, can I roll deception in order to deceive the party into thinking whatever? No, the party gets to, if they want to roll 20s, great. They see through your bullshit. Do you know what I mean? This is for 2 reasons. One of them is very obvious. One of them is very sneaky. The obvious one is PvP, I think, is generally sort of bad, and indulging in basically any of it, I almost always think. I have never been in a situation where PvP has happened and I felt like it added to the game. It made the game better. Do you know what I mean? It almost always, I think, is a distraction, leads to a lot of feels bad kind of moments, because there's sort of definitionally sort of this winner and this loser. And so, okay, so that time that Warren killed Mark was spectacular and amazing, okay? But part of it was, we were never playing that game again. We were done with that game. And so the very last thing that happened is Mark tried to prove that his incredibly busted, broken-ass basket weaver multi-class character was really powerful. And Warren's super dumb fighter who took non-optimal feats like throw anything actually could kick the shit out of him was really satisfying. Right. But like part of that, like that was the game was over. That was like a game ending moment. The game ended before that, but they wanted to see who would win. And the answer was the unoptimized fighter, which was pretty satisfying.
Luce's basket weaver. If you've ever seen like Mark build a character, especially with like any amount of homebrew, you'll understand what we're talking about. Underwater basket. So the genesis of this is underwater basket weaving is like an old joke about like what you majored in college with if you majored in something useless, right? Like you majored in underwater basket weaving, and so when your D&D character does a bunch of weird random bullshit. You put skill points into underwater basket weaving, right? Like which, and and because especially PF1E had a bunch of weird, like, especially third party like classes that let you do weird stuff. Whenever Mark was on his bullshit, he was doing underwater basket weaving. That is just.
To be clear, I am not throwing Mark. I have a lot of respect for that. There was a time when I really hated sort of this brand of character. I'm past that at this point. I think that really I was wrong in those days to be so anti, I guess I would say, underwater basket weaving. But the reason that moment was so funny was sort of the narrative of it, right? Is that, Warren in his second D&D game ever is, actually was able to like beat Mark in this sort of PvP. But the reason that I have this PvP rule is the obvious reason is that it just decreases the amount of PvP, which I think is good. But the secondary reason is that it kind of makes all PvP an opportunity for good faith interaction rather than bad faith interaction. And here's what I mean by that. So for Dragonlance, divine characters are incredibly rare, right? Magic users are pretty rare. In a village of 300 people, probably there's like a magician, like the local mage or whatever. But like the priest is non-magical. There is no sort of divine magic. Most players will run into, like I said, but like most players will run into a magic character in any town that they go into. But most characters will run into a character who's capable of divine magic maybe once in their lifetime. You know what I mean? We have a paladin and we have a paladin and we have a cleric in the Dragonlance game, and keeping their magic sort of secret is sort of like a thing, right? And so as they're using their abilities, as they're using lay on hands or smite or whatever else, right? They said, they were like, oh, can I like roll a deception check in order to, keep this quiet? I don't want the rest of the party to see. And I said, you don't roll that check. This is a PvP scenario, but you can ask the rest of the party, hey, can you just like give me this, like for story reasons? And everybody did. Everybody in the party was like, oh yeah, sure. Like I don't see it. I don't notice it kind of thing. And then Josh later saw it. And then they had this little moment where, okay, well now Josh's character, Johnny Big Sword. Okay, Josh's character, Johnny Big Sword, right? Is a little bit like in on kind of the secret, and I feel like that's like a really good positive sort of interaction that comes out of essentially the way that I sort of structure this system. So that's my take on. I actually love it so much. I don't know where. Do you know where this came from?
No, I don't think I do.
I don't know where it came from. Somebody said it, and I thought to myself, in the next game I run, I will do this thing. The defender sort of chooses their die roll. They don't roll, they just choose a number kind of thing. Because basically what it means is people can intentionally fail checks, right? And that's sort of how that, resolves.
So I think for like PvP, like combat, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Because essentially I think most of the time the way this works out is that you roll like, like, you're playing out a scene and you let the players kind of like talk it out. But I do think there's a thing to be said to like, in the 5e campaign I played, my character was a warlock, and it wasn't exactly secret, but like some of the extent of some of the stuff he was, and like one of the running kind of like gags was that this one other character was the only one that ever saw me doing like my, like the like there's like the one of the abilities of the fiend warlock is like you essentially you kill something, you absorb its essence, and like there's a visual effect to this, right? Like my character was described as like breathes in like this like black smoke that comes off of it and like gains like temporary hit points from it, and it's very apparent to anybody who sees it happen. But like I said, the kind of running gag was only the one other character who was always very suspicious of Mason ever saw it happening, right? But we also, the way we got there is we rolled it out, right? Like it's like like there were a bunch of perception checks that everybody failed except for this one character. And I think part of this is like, is the player okay with it? Like I was okay with it, right? It was like, I think this is the right way to resolve it. Everybody else was kind of okay with it. So I think allowing the flexibility there is what's important, right? Like, like there were a number of times it was like, well, let's leave it to the dice. Right. And then I do think that there are moments when like, if players are like it is essentially a point where I think a character is going to have to leave the party, right? Like if you get to like the the thief has killed someone and the paladin has seen it, right? Like I think the only way that that party advances is one of those two characters leaving the party, right? And I think at that point, you're pretty clear to just kind of like roll it out to see how that happens. Unless one of the, like, if the thief player is like, you know what, I don't, fair point, right? Like, we'll play out this battle, but I will intentionally, like, I'm okay with my character being the one that falls here, right? But I do think that if the player's like, well, let's roll it out, let's see how it goes, I think that's fine too. But I think that's more about reading the players than it is about something else.
Yeah, that definitely sort of tracks. Part of this also dovetails a little bit with the next one, which is what I said for social skills. My thing for social skills, I said, social skills don't represent the abstract concept of an argument or lie being put forward. They represent your skill at pulling it off, right? So if you want to deceive a guard into letting you into the watchtower, for instance, you can't just roll a deception check and see if you get in. You know what I mean? You have to sort of pitch the lie that you're looking to sell. And that also translates into sort of like the PvP realm, in the sense of you can't just,
I'm going to stab Steve in the back because law random.
Well, yeah, and it's also more than that. It's also like, I can't use a persuasion check to persuade the party to take my course of action, right? If the party is sitting there having an argument, I can't go, well, can I persuade so-and-so against their insight check? It's like, no. That's not how it works. You have to actually make a persuasive argument. If you can't convince this person, then they don't have to do whatever, which I think is mostly about sort of
it's about player agency.
Yeah. You would never want to take that choice away from a sort of a player who has a dog shit insight, who gets tricked into doing a thing like that's a huge feels bad moment that I would just kind of like want to avoid.
Right. No, absolutely. I think that does sound like something maybe I heard from the Angry GM. So maybe that's where you got kind of like the base level idea from. But that definitely makes sense. I definitely would have seen it like other places too. So I don't think it's exclusively there. But that makes sense to me.
Yeah. The next one is Heroic Inspiration. I love Heroic Inspiration. I think Heroic Inspiration is beautiful. They have changed it in 2024 to work in a really neat way. You get it on Level Up. Humans get it every day. You can just use it for the reroll, but obviously I don't care about that and don't want that. What I use Heroic Inspiration for is for these kind of cinematic, sort of like moments, right? Or I would actually kind of say rule breaking moments. So any of the moments that I had or any of the sort of rules that I had sort of like set up, I feel like you could use Heroic Inspiration to sort of pitch me on something like that. And I almost always want to use Heroic in that sort of way. In my own personal, right? Like we have another game that I'm playing in. I was playing Josh's character because Josh was out that week, and these flying swords came off the wall, and I said to Savadar, who's GMing, I was like, I want to use Heroic Inspiration and attack the knife, but I don't want to attack it. I want to jam my dagger into the wall through the sort of handle of the cutlass, because there's these cutlasses. And so I was like, so when I do that, it's just stuck to the wall and it can't attack us, even if it's still sort of alive. And he was like, okay, great. And I rolled, I hit my attack and everything like that. And it's sort of one-shotting these things, but doing so in like an out of left field, using something to help to help sort of get you past a typical rules barrier. Do you know what I mean? I never want somebody to like look at something cool that they could do, but then kind of go, you know what? I don't really think I can pull that off. I don't really have like the skill check for it. It's like, don't worry about that, right? If you want to do the cool thing, you can use your Heroic Inspiration to kind of bypass the inherent malice the system would put on, whatever, doing something kind of crazy along.
Yeah. So this actually, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I also, it dovetails into something that I think about a lot, which is using hero points, whatever form they are in, to do essentially narrative things, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is kind of like meta story. It's like a meta storytelling point, right? I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been listening to a lot of Discworld, and Discworld is like the whole thing is that it's like a meta, like it's a very meta set of stories, right? And something like, spending a hero point, so because you are heroically fated and fate has dictated that there is in fact an open door on the second floor, right? Like, in a scenario where that would make sense, right? Like, it does it happen to be the case that, like, this guy has like, a thing on his belt or something, and like maybe, right, like spend a point, maybe I'll give that to you, that kind of thing. Does that kind of thing make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly part of what I'm thinking. And I also think I, as a player, crave these. I hate, when I feel like I have a need. Like I, as a player, want to come up with kind of these cockamamie ideas. We're gonna, whatever. We're all gonna dress up as this thing and try and sneak our way into whatever, all that kind of stuff. I think this is a perfect system for sort of getting to the bottom of it, right? It's not something players can hoard. They just have heroic inspiration or they don't. They can earn heroic inspiration with cool sort of like role playing, good ideas, all that kind of stuff. Humans get more of it than other people, so they're incentivized to sort of think outside the box, do these kinds of things. That's how I want to use heroic inspiration, basically sort of like all of these games, because it also gets past the sort of that hoarding effect is real. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, these are called fate points. And you can just hoard your fate points. You can just have as many as you want, which basically comes down to saving your life, basically, because what you can do with a fate point is you can make a roll that would kill you or be lethal or knock you out or whatever into one that brings you to 1 HP instead. And I think that's just kind of objectively sort of the way that players process rules like this. They just always reduce it down to, oh, well, this thing is the ultimate counter spell to my death, so I'm just going to always have that sort of in the back pocket. And I think that's like totally wrong for how you want to like use these. Having only one at a time and use it or lose it kind of thing makes people kind of spend it a little bit more proactively, which I think is really clever.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing to also is like a very specific problem with the death, the death saving effect, right? Because this happens in Pathfinder as well, right? Like Pathfinder 2e, you can spend all of your hero points to not die, but instead, or not be dying, but instead just be unconscious at 0 hit points with no dying condition. And that like lose all hero points thing does kind of encourage you to spend down to 1, but also encourage you to like always have 1 in your back pocket, which is I think bad. Which I don't know necessarily how to do. Maybe it's just kind of like you can't ever use it for that purpose because that sucks, right? Like or you can't maybe use your own or something. I don't know. I'd have to think of a way to do to move around that, because I think using it specifically for the like save your character from dying thing is just a bad idea. I just don't think it ends up working out in the end.
Yeah. I put a thing in here for encounters. We've talked about this a million times on the podcast. This is sort of the Star Wars game really taught me this. This thing of like, God, they had a great term for it that I can't remember off the top of my head. But basically it's just like these, like I don't do kill all goblins encounters, right? Like the encounter is never going to be do this or else. There's always these secondary objectives. We've talked about it in Hell's Rebels with the rhinos, right? You are part of a diplomatic summit. There are people attacking the diplomatic summit. It is not about killing the people in the diplomatics who are attacking. It is about keeping the high-level civilian NPCs alive, because if somebody's fucking ambassador gets assassinated, that's really bad, right? Like those are the kinds of encounters that sort of I'm designing. But I wanted to flag this early for players because I think it requires a special eye to keep a lookout for sort of some of this stuff. And it's also a little tough because encounters in pre-written adventures tend to be written as kill all goblins encounters. So I'm having to, this is always sort of like the thread on the sweater that I pull to unravel this whole thing, right? It's like, oh, well, I have to add a little bit here in order to sort of turn this encounter into a better sort of structured encounter. And then adding a little bit here makes me add a little bit there, and we're gonna add a little bit elsewhere kind of thing, right? But like that's always going to be the way that I want to design and approach the encounters that exist in our games, because I just don't think the tension of kill all the enemies or die, is something happening?
Mr. Collins has decided to nibble on the green screen, and he was like putting his paws on my legs, so I thought I might pick him up, but no, he's gone back to his heating pad, so I think he's fine. Sorry.
You know what? Listen, you get back to the heating pad, Mr. Collins, okay? And then the last one I just mentioned is also just like immersion, right? This actually caused the most consternation, because I said generally speaking, my goal is to create an immersive earnest experience for the group of us. Tonally, my games tend to run much more like Lord of the Rings than Your Highness. You know the
Yeah.
Highness. Yeah. But the setting is there to be taken seriously rather than be the butt of the joke kind of thing. Obviously, everybody loves the movie Your Highness. This is a good movie, and that's kind of why I use it, right? Like, I think Your Highness is a good movie. I totally think that you could run a sort of a little self-aware, kind of half winking at the camera sort of campaign, but that's just not the kind of campaign that I'm looking to run. And so I wanted to sort of be clear about it, but that we ended up having to talk about it a whole bunch, and I sort of revised that to be like, I don't want this to be South Park. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is like, I don't know. It's South Park is probably the best example I can think of as, you know, something that undermines that sort of immersive kind of experience.
No, I totally get what you mean, right? Because like I do think that there's a level of like, well, have you ever seen A Knight's Tale?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like that's kind of like the ideal you're looking to hit, right? Like it's got
man.
like,
yeah, that's a great answer to be honest.
It's got humor, right? But at its core, it's a serious story with like, you know, real, you know, kind of like real stakes and real kind of like morals, maybe the wrong word, but like there's real
like
emotion.
Heart.
Yeah, heart.
Yeah, like characters are invested in the story, right? It's happening. It's real. There's jokes. This is something that I explained. I was like, Lord of the Rings is a funny, like there are jokes in Lord of the Rings. Merry and Pippin are characters that exist in Lord of the Rings, and they tell jokes, and that's totally fine. But Pippin never tells a joke that undermines the sort of, I don't know what I would even call it, the emotional.
It never does the Marvel movie bathos.
It never does the Marvel movie thing. I don't want to make this about that, but because it's more than just that. It's more than just sort of bathos, but that's the clearest indication of it. You know what I mean? Pippin never looks at Treebeard and he goes, you know, I'm going to need a weed whacker to trim your beard. Or it's like none of that. Like that stuff is so dumb. I hate that so much. It would never sort of happen.
I'm just imagining, you know, Smeagol biting off like Frodo's finger and jumping into the volcano, and then like Frodo just looks at the camera and says, "Well, that happened," right? Like,
yeah, I know. You know, yeah. So he never undermines the weight of the scene. That's really what it comes down to. Josh, you know what? Listen, you get it, buddy. I love you. The last thing that I chose to sort of add here that I want to talk about is artifacts. I've referenced artifacts before, but artifacts are this is the biggest one. This is the weightiest sort of system. And I actually asked the players, I was like, hey, do you want to add this thing to the game? The way artifacts work is it sort of replaces the magic item system that exists in 5e. In 5e, you can attune to 3 items, right? So you can only have 3 magic items at a time. Items have those rarities, you know, they call it uncommon, rare, very rare, but I call them epic and legendary kind of thing. And it sort of charts a path for how quickly you get those things. And basically what I did was I took that chart and I said, instead of giving players magic items that are out of the book that are a little sort of like generic or whatever, I want to give players magic items that are very personalized, essentially like the feats that you got. You guys remember the bonus feats from Hell's Rebels? Yeah. It is an expansion of that bonus feat system as represented through items rather than essentially feats, right? So for instance, the magic item of I use the example. I'm also doing this in 7th Expedition. So I used a bunch of 7th Expedition examples in here. And I'm going to do a tiny bit of sort of spoiling. Not that much, I guess, because I think Rachel has already heard. But basically, I used the example of Rachel's ranger. Character Marn in 7th Expedition is a ranger who has a Beastmaster ranger who has an animal companion. The animal companion is a little baby rhino, right? Leonin and Saran ride rhinos mount. So, you know, like this is sort of how that works. And there are each character gets 3 artifacts, obviously, for each of their sort of attunement slots. And by the time they're level 4, a character should have 3 uncommon items, and then they start upgrading kind of from there, basically. Yeah, Lou says, my fist that I've yet to use because I keep worrying a bigger monster will show up. Let's use it or lose it, okay? I also think everybody forgets to do this, to be fair. Like, I don't know that, well, whatever, I'm not gonna get into it. Mard is the person who has used his magic item the most, because it's cool. But anyway, the way this works is these 3 artifacts are like a talent tree in World of Warcraft or something like that. It is it's a representation of a piece of your character that you can sort of go down a little bit. For Marn, the 3 specs for Marn I have are Rhino Rider, Titan Slayer, and Trophy Hunter, right? And they represent these different aspects of Marn, the character. Marn is a zoologist, cares about trees and bugs and plants and stuff like that. But also Marn has an animal companion. That animal companion is a rhino, right? So what the artifacts do is they sort of introduce a focus to each of those kind of aspects, right? So Rhino Rider is about, okay, do you want to become sort of one with your rhino? This is the path that you go down, right? That artifact is called the Dread Saurian's Collar. She gets it. Massive lizardmen, beasts of burden, dinosaurs that have ancient lizardman magic in order to make your animal companion cool, whatever. She hasn't found either of the other 2 weapons, so I'm not going to talk about them. But basically, the weapon can be upgraded. And those upgrades come more or less in line with when you would get kind of additional magic items to attune to in 5e. Now, the core assumption in 5e is that you're going to replace your magic item. You're going to have a boot of elven kinds or whatever, and you're going to replace it with, this other thing, because you can only attune to 3 things, and this rare item is better than this uncommon item. Okay, fair enough. The way that I do this is you essentially get an upgrade item. You get a little, I won't go into the details. It's very narrative specific. You get a little item and you can, touch the item, is artifact power. You put the artifact on the artifact and it becomes more powerful and you get the next sort of level up. So you're, so for the Collar of the Dread Saurian, let's say Marn wants to upgrade to be a Rhino Rider. The Collar of the Dread Saurian goes from uncommon to rare, and there's a whole new feature added to it. So the core feature is something like Para the Rhino gets a bunch of bonuses, and I think can use Second Wind like a fighter. It gives Para that ability to sort of like heal herself. Let's say this is not what the actual thing is, but let's say the rare upgrade for Rhino Rider is Para is now a large-sized creature, and you can mount and dismount Para. Now you're truly riding your Rhino. You know what I mean? Like, and here's sort of like rules. And the crucial thing about upgrading artifacts is that you don't know what the upgrade is going to be. You don't get to look at the list and go, oh, okay, well, Rhino Rider gives me this, Titan Slayer gives me that, Trophy Hunter gives me this, right? All you know are the spec names, so you know the name of kind of what the spec is going to be, the specialization is going to be. You know the effect you currently, you currently have, right? And the other thing is alignment. All artifacts have an alignment, and that includes evil alignment. And so you might look at your evil aligned thing and go, I'm gonna pump this bad boy up. And the other thing that you can do is you can pump things, it's just one item that goes all the way up. So theoretically speaking, if somebody wants to rush one legendary item and 2 uncommon items, they could do that. If they want to spread it evenly, they could also sort of, do that. It's really kind of like up to them structure their character. So that's my advanced approach to sort of artifacts. The other thing is that all of these items are tied to sort of little side quests and like deep sort of lore stuff. The thing that happens in 7th Expedition is they get a little vignette that plays in their head of 3 scenes for sort of how what the artifact is, where it kind of comes from, and they don't necessarily understand what those scenes mean, but it's part of the identifier. You cast Identify on an artifact, you get these sort of visions from the artifact's past and creation and all the sort of the rest of it. I replicated something kind of similar to the Dragonlance game, but it doesn't work in the same way. The lore is a little bit different. But anyway, that's artifacts. I think I've covered basically all of it. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
That sounds super interesting. My initial gut reaction is that like, somebody decided to jump on my lap. So he's visiting again. was gonna say my initial gut reaction is that it's hard to make meaningful choices if you don't know the choices you're making. But it does sound like you're giving like basically enough information that it's not an issue.
The thing I want to avoid, I don't want anybody to make a choice purely ludically. Do you know what I mean?
No,
the idea, so the idea between Trophy Hunter, Titan Slayer, what was the third one? Rhino Rider, right? These are different aspects, and this is kind of my vision a little bit for sort of like Marn, in the sense of these are core aspects of Marn's character and how I expect sort of like Marn to want to sort of grow, right? And part of that is sort of the lore side of things. Is the growth of Marn about Para, about, you know, deepening the bond with this baby rhino that has come, you know, with Marn on his expedition kind of thing? Is it about the sort of study and catalog of these creatures? That's Trophy Hunter, right? You know, Rachel doesn't have this artifact yet, but the core of that artifact is the you know, learning. It is cataloging the enemies that she's fighting, is earning the trophies of the different, you know, the different sort of kills. And then Titan Slayer is mostly just kind of connecting into some other lore that I guess I will sort of lightly spoil. Titan Slayer is about Leonin. So the part of the story of Seventh Expedition is that the Leonin maybe came from this continent as part of a big exodus, but nobody knows. Marn is a Leonin character and sort of discovering about his Leonin maybe heritage, maybe, who knows, maybe, right? There's Nakatl, these jaguar people, are they related to the lion people? You know, what's the history there? Titan Slayer is about sort of that avenue of kind of things. And the way that I design all of these artifacts is in similar sort of terms, right? You know, like what are the, you know, who knows, maybe, what are the aspects of your character that you're connected to the most and that you want to go down the path of sort of the most. And I would rather somebody make that choice based on sort of a holistic and kind of earnest understanding of the lore of the character, kind of let the game follow in suit with that. Then let the gameplay drive that sort of thing, especially for alignment, right? You know, the evil artifacts are not evil because they make you at cross paths with the party, but they are evil in the sense of like, it makes you a sort of selfish or ambitious kind of character to sort of invent an artifact out of no. Assume I'm playing, you know, let's assume I'm playing a warlock character. My evil artifact might bring me further into the contracted nature of my, you know, my bond with my patron, right? That I'm willing to sell even more of soul, or I'm willing to do evil deeds in order to, you know, pay down my debt. Maybe it's something like every time I do that thing where I the soul, like if I'm Mason or whatever, I'm sucking the soul out of people, where I suck the soul out of people, you know, I'm generating some level of kind of value or power that is getting directed off into the artifact, and that's an evil act, right? I'm sort of damning the souls of the people that I slay or whatever. But you know, that's like a decision that someone, you know, could choose to sort of lean into if they want to. So yeah, in the Dragonlance game, I sort of teased a sort of a Death Knighty, like Arthas-y kind of artifact, where I was like, everybody gets a good artifact, everybody gets a neutral artifact, right? And for Felix, who's Lokix's character, friend of the cast, Lokix is playing kind of a paladin, a very upstanding sort of like knight. And they were talking about like, you know, oh, he's gonna feed the fact to become Arthas, and it's like that's actually sort of what I'm going for, right? Like if you are a paladin, you are, all of those artifacts are lawful. It's just, do you want to put a little power into that lawful evil artifact that you have, right? What does it mean when you're powering up, you know, whatever this thing is, kind of thing. Anyway, that's my spiel.
That makes sense. No, that sounds super cool. I have actually kind of like gotten on board with the 5e, I guess, kind of style of itemization in the follow-up game to the 5e game. We're running in PF2e, but Chris is running it with the variant that's essentially like the automatic itemization levels up, right? Like instead of like, you know, having to go through and find like the fun, because in both Pathfinder 1e and 2e, like itemization is kind of core part of character building, and so instead of having to, scroll around and find like, +1 fundamental runes, like you just kind of get that on a schedule as you level up. And it leaves the kind of the loot level magic items to all be things that are kind of like more meaningful loot and less kind of like, standard, power 7 loot, which is like the big 7 was a thing that came out of PF1E that they did a lot of good work to get rid of, but there's still kind of like that level of like, oh, well, you're expected to have like a +1 weapon by this point and a +2 weapon by this point. That kind of thing.
That's actually one of the things I explicitly want to get rid of. Actually, I think those weapons are technically like those items are better point for point, right? So for instance, just to give you an understanding, my artifacts. We can do, here we'll do Shadow of the Dragon Queen. Okay, this is the shadow. They got artifacts. Everybody got a ring. Basically, what happened is at the end of last session, they sort of found a little bonus encounter. A guy had left, and they could have not uncovered this, but they figured out where the camp on this guy was. The guy had stolen a medallion, and the guy is this sort of magical dragon. When the dragon dies, he dissolves into the acid, and he had the medallion in his hand, and the medallion dissolved, and it left these 5 rings. And the 5 rings are themed after the metallic dragon flights. It's very dragon focused because this is Dragonlance, whatever, who cares? But all of those rings have an effect that reads something along the lines of, and this is just for this is for Felix, this is for Paladin Lokix's characters. It says, once per day as a bonus action, you can infuse yourself with the power of a gold dragon's flame until the end of your next turn. You add your proficiency bonus to your AC, gain resistance to physical and fire damage, and provoke all creatures. Provoked creatures are ones that get disadvantage on anything that doesn't target you, basically. So the idea is that rather than give Felix a +1 longsword, right, which would mechanically be way better than this, you know what I mean? Like it would just add so much more to every attack and sort of like damage roll, right? You're actually giving someone a powerful moment where they get to sort of, like command that, like you get to do a cool, crazy thing that commands the narrative of that moment. And that's a little bit of what I want to. Lou's artifact that she mentioned in chat, the fists that she never uses, right? The rules for the fists are something like, as a monk, your weapon die doubles. So all the attacks you make this turn, instead of being whatever it is, like 1d8, 1d10, it's 2d10, right? So it's a huge damage boost, but it's for 1 round, right? And I think if you were, and it's only for the number, you could do a total of 3 attacks, I think, with that damage boost, which probably wouldn't all hit or something. So you're probably looking at an extra 2d10 damage, just like if I were to math out kind of the raw balance kind of thing, on like a once per day sort of level. I bet it would be better for Lou to have a +1 thing that makes more of her attacks hit and her attacks to deal incrementally sort of like more damage. But I just think that's boring, and I hate it. I want to get rid of that kind of thing. I also really like the idea of sort of like leveling up, some of these artifacts. Like, not that I can spoil any of this because none of the characters are close enough, but the idea is that, like, if I'm Felix and I really love my once a day bonus action, taunt everybody, give myself resistance and whatever, right? If that's the part of my gameplay that I am leveling up, it's going to key into, whatever is going to happen is going to key into sort of that, right? So I know if this is my 3 artifacts, this is the one I like using the most on a mechanical side. Even if I don't know what the specifics of it are, I know that I am going to be enhancing that artifact, or the effect of that artifact or whatever, by doubling down on it and choosing to kind of upgrade that one. So anyway, that's the philosophy with artifacts. I like artifacts quite a lot. I find them, I don't know, very fulfilling to make, to be honest with you. Sitting down and just, it's a big giant spreadsheet that I have, writing out this whole spreadsheet and creating the lore for why the artifacts are how they work. One of the ones that we did for 7th Expedition was Cho, the ancient stylist. They went to Tajteka, this ancient land and city, and Warren's character is playing a scroll sage, like he's a wizard, likes writing stuff down. And I was looking up how the ancient Romans wrote stuff. I was like, how do they record things? And it turns out the thing that they did was they had a big tablet, like a stone tablet, and they covered it with wax, and then they used a stylus to make that's where the word stylus comes from, is to make sort of indentations in the wax according to their Latin script or whatever, and then they would pour ink over that whole thing and kind of press a paper onto it. And because there would be no ink on the wax, the only thing that would sort of like translate is the thing. And it's like all of that extra lore, everybody got really fucking into. This is how they do the this is how they make their scrolls and all the rest of it, and this is their writing implement, the stylus, all that stuff. Everybody got really into that kind of stuff, and you don't get that without something like artifacts. So I don't know. That's it.
Makes sense.
Anyway, those are the big decisions that I made for those are the big decisions that I made for this Dragonlance game. So yeah.
Yeah, very, very cool. That's awesome. Yeah.
Also, I feel like I make encounters much harder because I guess we didn't talk about this part and I didn't warn players about it. I warned them a little bit about it. I want I want creatures to have these discoverable sort of effects, and I think that makes encounters naturally harder. And so, like if they're fighting the same creature over and over again, its mechanics a little bit like a boss or a dungeon or something kind of along those lines. And so giving people powerful magic items like this, I actually really helps sort of even the odds, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Very cool.
Okay. Well, that's it. Yeah. How's your week?
It's been good. I've mostly been, I've been telling you before the show, an aggravating amount of my week has been shoveling snow, because since we we recorded on Thursday, right? It snowed on Saturday. It's basically been snowing straight since Saturday, yep. Right? It stopped snowing last night, but now there's so much wind that my driveway got recovered again last night, and I had to blow the driveway at least 3 or 4 times. So it's been a time that has been a lot of my non-gaming stuff. I've been playing a lot of Disco Elysium, and I just think it's so much fun, and it's like if you took all the stuff we talk about with the stuff that we like about D&D, kind of these clever things that are that you don't want to step on by getting the mechanics too much in the way, because there is very little combat, right? And all of this, imagine if you could have your skills be small enough that you can tie a bunch of outcomes to these little things, right? Instead of I have logic, visual calculus, savoir faire, empathy, volition, authority. These are all skills in Disco Elysium, right? And so I can go down the rabbit hole of so my logic skill enables this, but I don't have enough what's the physique, or it's physical something to that's effectively the strength stat to deal with this in a physical way, right? And the skills are broken out enough that you can kind of get that granular adjustment per thing that I'm really enjoying it. It's kind of what everybody really appreciated about in Baldur's Gate 3, I think in a lot of ways it's done a little bit better in Disco Elysium, because you don't have the combat aspect, really. It's just these kind of problem solving skill checks, and you also don't have to be as worried about. Essentially, it's 2d6 plus your modifier versus I get to a target, and so the curve works out differently, and so it's slightly easier to hit further out checks, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But yeah, I think the systems are really cool, well done, and the story is interesting. So I'm having a great time with Disco Elysium. Learning all about and it's got all sorts of weird lore about that setting, which is also very cool, right? Stuff that crosses over with the real world stuff, right? I learned the word communard, which was not a word I was familiar with before. And the communards are one of the first in the real world are it was a French commune. It was one of the first real attempts at communism that kind of fell apart. as it always is. But it didn't like take over the government, right? The reason you don't know about it as much is because it's like it didn't. There wasn't a revolution that took over the French government. It just kind of was its own thing that eventually gets, I believe, crushed by the French government. But there's an equivalent organization in the game world that are called the Communards, not French because there's no French, right? Like in and then there's also just like more fantastical stuff. Like there's this gray fog called the Mist that like they send like trucks and airships through, where like time kind of like behaves weirdly, but it has weird effects to people that go through it. But it's kind of like this encroaching like horror fog that affects the world that is not directly does not directly impact the story, but it's kind of like part of the set setting that I think is or the world dress of the world that I think is super interesting. So, yeah.
Okay. I am thinking a lot these days about clean and efficient sort of world building versus inefficient world building. Something I was thinking about when it came to Starfield, for instance, versus Skyrim is Skyrim has really efficient world building. It was like really easy for me to understand sort of, kind of the conflict between the Imperials and the Stormcloaks. And I could really easily sort of rattle off the core things that are upsetting most players or like most characters sort of in the world of Skyrim, right? But when it came to Starfield, I found Starfield to be just kind of incomprehensible, the lore. And the fine tuning of that is not it's not easy. It's it's kind of a complicated sort of thing. The thing that got me on this was sort of Dragonlance, because in Dragonlance there is Tiamat, who is called Takesis, and there's Bahamut, who is called Paladine. And just being able to say, oh, Takesis is Tiamat and Paladine is Bahamut is like, oh, fucking of course. I understand immediately. Good metallic dragons, bad chromatic dragons, sure, I'm on board. Versus something like I don't know, like Eberron had really kind of incomprehensible gods for me. Even something like Pathfinder, I don't, like some of them I could probably summarize for you, but some of them I kind of like can't. Like Greyhawk maybe is like the easiest version of this. We're just like the gods are pretty, it's like, oh yeah, sure, this is the dwarf god, this is the elf god, this is the god of healing, or whatever. And so I'm thinking a lot about that these days, especially in designing my own kind of like setting. Where are the opportunities where you're leaning into a player's intuitive understanding of your world building versus where players getting kind of off put by jargon? It's a big one that I think about all the time, right? Like, am I introducing a lot of jargon in the game that a player's not going to be able to conceive of very well or comprehend why it kind of matters? They have to spend a ton of brain power in order to sort of like track this complex kind of thing. Because I think that most worlds are built by a combination, like most good worlds are sort of built by a combination of these two things. There are places where it just leans into exactly what you expect, and there are places where it asks you to deviate and understand, oh, it's a little bit different in this world, here's how it's different, right? And combining those sort of two factors is, I don't know, whatever. My philosophy on fucking world building, I guess.
Can you give me an example of jargon that you think takes up too much brain power?
Let me find it. And the problem is that I don't know of a good example because they fall out of the back of my brain.
No, that's fair enough. I just thought you might have one off the top of your head.
The Starfield factions you can join. So you have the Constellations, and then you have the Free Star Rangers. And the Free Star Rangers are they're like I understand they're the cowboy guys. Like Constellation is like the Federation from Star Trek. See, even you can hear it here. I understand Constellation because I remembered it as, oh, this is the Federation from Star Trek, right? And the Free Star Rangers, I also kind of remember as like these Wild West cowboy guys, but there's a lot of specifics in them, and yeah, it's stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of like a good example of something. It's something that's very, very specific. Shadowlands would maybe be the best example of it. It's hard to explain Shadowlands lore to someone who doesn't have a complicated understanding of the Warcraft universe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like if I were to talk about anima as a concept, right? Or like the factions and houses of Maldraxxus as like concepts. Do you know what I mean? Like that stuff is hard to it's hard to grok. You need to give players sort of a time. And I think part of the failure of Shadowlands, this is something that Blizzard have said, is that it was kind of an incomprehensible. It was very high concept. This is what a high concept would theoretically.
Yeah. No, it doesn't help that, like, even if you've been playing the game for, like, 15 years or whatever, you didn't necessarily understand what the afterlife of the Warcraft universe was supposed to be, or immediately grok that, like, these 4 or 5 versions of it that you're interacting with are the sum and substance of all of the afterlife, and also, right? Like,
Maybe a great example of where this overhead really sucks is if I'm playing World of Warcraft in the Mists of Pandaria Warlords eras and I'm really connected to the lore, that's a really shitty place to be because it's before Chronicle. The lore of World of Warcraft got so much better just from the advent of Chronicle, right? Kind of conceptualizing these 6 different forces, understanding the Void Lords, the Titans, what they're doing, why they kind of care about it. It just really organized things in a way that it completely changed. I mean, I was there. I was part of this experience, right? The amount that I understood a character like Deathwing, what did he want? What were his motivations in Cataclysm? I don't think I would have been able to accurately tell you, but I can tell you now because I understand all of this stuff. It has been sort of like put together,
it's
and
been
I can
chronicled,
understand
you might say.
Yeah, it's been chronicled, yeah, and organized into a way that I find like much more comprehensive. The more the work that I'm putting into my personal homebrew setting, Saran, right, is the more I'm trying to think. Which is part of why, like when I made it, I've never really said to somebody, this is like the Roman, this is the fantasy Roman Empire, but I'm saying that more and more now because I think it's useful. Or like the gods in Saran are, the gods in there's 8 of them and they align to an elemental chart that everybody understands. Fire, water, earth, wind, light, dark, life, death, right? Those are the 8 gods, and they have churches and they have Bibles and they have sort of congregations, but like, that stuff can all sort of be different. And people understand it. It's like, oh, I understand. This is like there is the Church of Phyrexis, and this behaves a little bit like the Catholic Church, and they go on these crusades because Phyrexis or whatever, and like that's like a thing that you can just kind of to pop down a line of sort of intuitive sort of steps, and then I can kind of save some of the esoteric stuff for like there is a whole nother continent on the other side of the world and it's fucking cursed. Everybody says it's cursed. Don't go there. All the expeditions that have tried to map it out have been bad. There's all these secrets there. That's a lot of heavy world building stuff that I'm basing a whole fucking campaign around, basically. But anyway, so yeah.
Makes sense. Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. What have you been up to this week besides?
Satisfactory is a big one. We played a lot of Satisfactory. I'm actually in a very brain melting place in Satisfactory, which is that we have reached a big tier, and I am now retrofitting a lot of my low level to be more efficient, which is unfun. It's not the funnest part. Satisfactory is a very fun game and I love it a lot, but like this is the part that it makes me want. I kept having to just get up and walk away and lie down and like scroll something. It's just like, because like what I'm doing is realizing, oh, I need 750 more screws in order to make this thing efficient. And so I'm not, in order to make the thing I want to make, I have to go back down all this list of things. Oh, I have to make modular frames, and my modular frames need to make screws and iron plates, and screws and iron plates are the first thing you fucking make. And I have to run a line of 720 iron per minute in order to feed all of this sort of stuff. So I'm not actually working on the big complex stuff at the top end of kind of the tech tree that I want to be doing. I'm going back down and working on massive versions of the low end of the tech tree. To take a lot of time and space to just kind of like go through, and I'm just sitting there and I have 32 smelters and I'm clicking on each individual one and setting it right settings, and it's just like that's the stuff that's kind of like brain melting. But the Vertifactory is a very beautiful thing. I want to show it to everybody. It is truly massive. The way that I've designed this factory folks on the podcast, I'm sorry, I'm using my hands to describe it. The way I've designed this factory is there's sort of a 0-0, right? I think of it like a thing. Then there's x-axis and y-axis, and materials travel up and down the x and y-axis, and outputs for like final outputs is what I would call it, happen on the sorry, what did I say? X-axis, whatever the other one is.
Z?
So basically, as you go up the levels, as you go up the Z, right? Each floor is just one thing. It just produces one thing, and that's it. First floor, we're turning iron ore into iron ingots. Second floor, we're turning iron ingots into iron plates. Third floor, we're turning iron plates into screws or whatever it is, that kind of thing. And all of the traveling between floors in order to make that happen happens on the x-axis, right? And when I have the thing that I want, I want to output iron plates so that when I need iron plates to build stuff, I can just go get it. That happens on the y-axis, basically. And I conceived of this, and I thought about it. I was like, this is a really to sort of build a factory that can handle truly everything, because I can just build it out infinitely in either direction, right? But what I didn't plan for is for the number of floors. So it is a truly titanic object that rises in the sky higher than the space elevator that the game is centered around. The lore of Satisfactory is you're putting stuff in a space elevator and shooting it up into low orbit. Well, the Vertifactory is taller than the low orbit thing that you're shooting it into. Which is kind of funny to think about. And I got so high, and I looked at the space elevator, and it's actually a really shitty model because it's not supposed to look down so up close. But you know, hey, it is what it is. So anyway, been playing a lot of Satisfactory. Been listening to so much The Rest Is History. I love The Rest Is History. It's a fantastic podcast. I learned all about the Kaiser Wilhelm from the First World War. His kind of ridiculous, his ridiculous sort of, I don't know, medical treatments. His left arm was sort of stunted. It was about a foot shorter, and he couldn't use it. And doctors had all of these cockamamie kind of contraptions for how to fix that. They would kill a hare, like a rabbit hair, and then stick his malformed arm in the carcass of this rabbit hare as a child, because the idea is that the blood of this vigorous animal hare is going to rejuvenate the arm, which didn't work. His parents put him in a brain expander machine. The idea, it's like phrenology. The idea is it's this machine that, like, they were describing it. They like suctions onto your head when you're a child and like pulls it painfully apart. And the idea is that you are creating a bigger brain or bigger skull so that you can fit more brain in there and be smart. You know what I mean? Very like turn of the century mad science quackery, you know, but I don't know. I've been listening to a lot about sort of, you know, pre-war, post-war, Weimar, Nazi Germany, because they did a whole sort of like series on all. I learned a lot about Hitler drinking gun cleaner. This is a big thing that apparently affects.
Say Hitler drinking gun cleaner?
Yeah, this gun cleaning fluid, this oil. It's called it was called sort of trench treatment or something like that. There's this whole list of them, which were things that soldiers on the in the trenches learned to do, that were essentially all superstition, learned to do in order to prevent stuff like trench foot.
Okay.
You know, like, because we didn't have a modern understanding of medicine really at the time.
Right.
And so there was just like a lot of kind of cockamamie solutions. And one of them was drinking this gun cleaner fluid. And so you've heard, for instance, the amphetamines that Hitler, like, have you ever heard this? This is an outgrowth of that. Hitler was on gun cleaner fluid. He was drinking gun cleaner fluid because he felt as though it helped him focus or something kind of along those lines. It definitely didn't do that. It was bad for you. And it gave him all of these problems with his digestive tract. And in order to, oh my God, hello, what a good, yeah. And in order to deal with the malices, the bad effects of the gun cleaner fluid, the doctor basically put him on this sort of kind of cocktail of amphetamines, because it was the only thing that really got him to the other side of the stomach
Okay,
problems
yeah.
brought on by the gun cleaner fluid. And anyway, I learned all about these German spa towns, which is another thing that German people used to think that their spa towns with sulfur hot springs were really good for you, and all the rest, and actually it's pretty bad for you. All of these big diplomatic meetings are happening lead up to the First World War, or like the backroom politics of Weimar Germany are happening. And it's just all of the senators are going to a poorly insulated or poorly ventilated hot spring and discussing like the fate of the Germany as they're all getting kind of quietly fucked up on the mild asphyxiation of being
Sulfur
in
fumes.
in these sulfur fumes. Yeah. It's just wild. Yeah, it's just like wild stuff like that. That you don't think you don't think that the world turns on the axis of decisions like this, but it absolutely does. That podcast is so great. They just bring out so many, like the leader of Hitler's brown shirts was a gay guy, and everyone just ignored it because they really liked the brown shirts and what the brown shirts were doing. And then when the Nazi sort of army, the Nazi sort of army high command, were like, okay, well now we're the party in power, but we have risen to power by essentially sanctioning street violence between, stormtroopers and Marxist paramilitary organizations. Now we have to be the party of law and order, which means we have to disband the brown shirts. And
I mean, disband's a generous way to put the Night of Long Knives, right?
What they're talking about, the Night of Long Knives. Yeah. So the Night of Long Knives, the guy, the pretense that they were using for this, for I think his name was Raum.
Raum was like the more revolutionary side of we've had this argument off podcast about some of this stuff, but there was this concept of they're called beefsteak Nazis, which were brown on the outside and red on the inside, right? Because there was a revolutionary, kind of in the Marxist sense, a core to some of fascism, right, coming up through Mussolini, who is there's a lot you can get into here, but I believe Raum wanted to do a second revolution to overthrow Hitler, to bring more class stuff into it, and then the Night of Long Knives.
Yeah, well, this was specifically the thing. He just wanted to fight people. He kind of fucking hated sort of the German bureaucracy and all of the rest of it, right? And then, but so they're telling the story about the Night of Long Knives. It's happening in a spot town because this is where Raum is. He's obviously having sex with some, whatever German twink boy, in this spot town. They come to the sauna. Where he's steaming or something like that, and none of the sort of the guys who are sent there to kill him want to fight him because he is such a whatever. So they just kind of say, well, listen, the party's moving in a different direction. We're really embracing our kind of, mainstream conservative fan base. Just do the right thing. And they put a pistol in the sauna with him. Just kill yourself, kind of thing. And they all walk out and leave and expect to hear a gunshot, but obviously he's not going to kill himself. And he's furious. And so then they have to go and wrestle and subdue him and all the rest. And there's this whole thing about, the real wedge that was Hitler actually really quite liked this wing of the party and didn't want to get rid of it and had to be persuaded. And the way they did it was by leaning on his homosexuality as degenerate and all the rest of it. Those stories are great. I love them. They're fun, but also very depressing. So, I don't know. That's a lot of what I've been doing. And playing Civ 7, which sucks, but I just don't have anything better to do. And it's a great thing to turn, to turn a wheel, to cool down at the end of a big, incredible day. Lots of stuff going on, right? I'm just gonna zone out and play Isabella and collect my codexes, and I'm not having fun, but I'm also not bored. So,
no, that's totally fair. I totally get that. Yeah, no, that's
maybe the best version. That's the best way I could put it. I'm not having fun, but I'm not bored. That's what this game is.
That makes a lot of sense, right? I'm looking forward to doing some of that with Monster Hunter when that comes out in a couple weeks, right? I pre-ordered my Monster Hunter.
I'm looking forward to Avowed. We were talking about Avowed off the podcast, tomorrow.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's part of frankly why I wanted to do this today is so that like I have to go on a business trip on Wednesday, so I'm like maybe I can get a little of a bit of a vout in tomorrow night before things kick off.
Yeah, it's exactly what I'm hoping I get to do this weekend is just kind of like go nuts on this game and really sort of like sink into it. So yeah.
What else is coming out soon? Undermine.
Cabernet. Well, whatever. We'll talk about that at the end.
What was
4 days, 3 days? Cabernet, one of my games.
Oh right, yes.
The vampire, the vampire game. Obviously, I'm thinking about it because
yeah.
Work, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like there's other stuff. I don't know. What do you this is the hot topic in gaming world. Do you think Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming out this year?
Yes. Wait, what? Didn't they say it's coming out this year? Why?
Sure. Why wouldn't it?
Like they're just gonna push it?
Yeah.
I think people are putting I frankly think Grand Theft Auto 6 is not going to be as Titanic as everybody assumes it is going to be. Like I think it will be, right? But like I think people are sort of my view of Grand Theft Auto 6 is like I don't know, like maybe like Halo 3 actually would be a good example of this. Halo 2 I think was kind of a true sort of turning point in the industry. Sort of Halo 2 is kind of the game that I think of that kind of broke through a little bit like World of Warcraft to be an example, right? Like something that took stuff percolating in sort of the understream and then all of a sudden galvanized it into a product and it exploded, right? This was Xbox Live, obviously. And then Halo 3 came out. Halo 3 is, it was a big game. It was pretty important. Sold a lot and everything, I guess. But like ultimately, at the end of the day, Halo 3 was kind of another one of these, right? I think you could make an argument that Grand Theft Auto 5 was this, just because the sort of advent of these GTA servers and RP and GTA Online and all of the rest of that kind of stuff. I think Grand Theft Auto 6 is just going to kind of be more of the same. It's going to probably be the biggest selling title of this year, but I don't think it's going to represent any kind of massive shift in sort of the AAA development of the kind of industry, which is what a lot of people are seeming to kind of pin its hopes on. Obviously everyone says it's going to be the first $100 game, which I don't know that I think is true, but
I don't think it's
everybody
coming out
wants
this
it.
year.
Really? Why not?
I think first in my wheelhouse is that I think they just announced Borderlands is coming out in October, and they're both published by Take-Two, right? Ultimately,
Hold on. I don't think that's true. I think Borderlands is 2K.
Mm-hmm. Oh, am I getting my two named?
Yeah,
like,
Borderlands is 2K. I
Okay.
only happen to know this because Civ is also 2K. And I just happen to know a lot of people who work at 2K. Like a lot of ex-Occupar people are 2K people now. And Take-Two is different. Take-Two is the English one. Take-Two is obviously
Take-Two is the parent company of 2K.
Wait, what? No way! You're kidding me. Really?
Yeah. I'm not kidding you. So Rockstar or Grand Theft Auto 6 is being published by Rockstar, and its parent company is also Take-Two.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know this. I didn't know this at all. That's wild. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. I do think you're right. I feel like there was a thing here.
This is wild. This is changing like everything.
Yeah, it acquired it in 2005.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like. Yeah.
Fair enough.
No, it was founded as a subsidiary of Take-Two. Right. This is the reason I thought this made sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think of Take-Two, and I also think of Private Division because all this drama. This is like work stuff. All this drama with Private Division is happening. Take-Two, and do you know Private Division? They're like the Kerbal Space Program people. I happen to also know a couple of Private Division people who no longer work there. Now they're making their,
Is this a thing where like Kerbal 2 is like garbage pile or something like that?
Yeah, and there was this thing where nobody knew what Private Division was doing. It weirdly affected me in a kind of wild way, in the sense that Private Division funded a game that nobody knew who it was. Basically, okay, this is so wild. When you sign the publishing rights, almost always you become the control. You own like the Steam page, right? So like if I have this publishing rights for Cabernet, right? Steam pays me, and then I disperse that funding to the developer based on our kind of internal contracts. Private Division was doing that essentially, right? But when Private Division got hollowed out, they didn't cancel their contracts. Private Division, the entity, still existed on kind of a corporate level, but nobody worked there anymore. So who was processing those payments? Who do I talk to make sure the payments are getting processed? Like all of those decisions were like up in the air, and it became like a minor thing in sort of press world where like I think Jason Schreier is the one who posted the article about this. He was like, I cannot figure out who actually is working at Private Division, but these contracts are not void. What's going on with that? Because like a lot of the times when labels will be sort of disbanded, they'll void all their contracts. They'll basically say, yep, we're releasing all of our games, take it all back, kind of thing. But nobody wants to do that, for super obvious fucking reasons, right? Anyway, so that's the drama with Private Division. They got set up by former Humble people again, so they live in it is back to the way it is.
Isn't Humble also like falling apart?
Well, Humble fell apart.
Okay.
Fired a billion people, and also, but the ex-Humble people are taking over Private Division. So Private Division, they are the new Private Division people, and Private Division I think is its own, no longer a 2K thing. Maybe they bought themselves out of it or something like that. It's complicated.
Okay. Well, that's wild. But to unwind it, that's why I think that that's reason number one with a bullet is that Take-Two would, because Take-Two is the one with investors, right, and the one that's responsible.
Sure.
Is I don't think they would put another launch inside of 2025 when I think they announced Borderlands 4 is coming out in October.
Yep.
But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't think they'll do that. But yeah. Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about while we're chatting?
I don't know. What do you think about WoW stuff? Have you paid any attention to it? Comes out next week.
Yeah. I would say I saw that. What? They're trikes, and trikes are cool. That's my opinion, right?
I need to do Plunderstorm. I haven't gotten any of the new Plunderstorm stuff. Maybe I'll just wait for Plunderstorm.
I would say there are rewards in the Traveler's Journal for doing Plunderstorm, and you can queue for Plunderstorm inside of WoW now.
Okay.
You can
I'm logged into Bairn and I can queue into Plunderstorm. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. There's maybe 200 total worth of Travelers. This is it's a short month, but there's a longer track. It's if you get an extra 1,000 Traveler's Log stuff, you get an extra 500
shit.
currency.
I do need to do that. Oh,
exactly.
Man. I normally have such an easy time, but I've not been playing WoW.
I'm waiting for the final push quests because I'm looking at my options. I don't want to do any of this.
Honestly, most of the time I fill them on crafting order. But I haven't really been doing crafting stuff all that much. So
yeah.
I'm
at 1270 out of 2,000 total for the month, which is enough to get at this point. If I don't hit the 2,000, it won't be the end of the world. It's just 500 missed trader tender, which is a lot, and I don't want to miss that. But I got they give you the reward at the 1,000 mark, so I got my costume. I got my Lunar New Year's costume, so we'll see.
Yeah, see, funny enough, that's the stuff I care least. I care almost all entirely about the Trader Center. I actually don't even like most of the stuff that's on this month. This is all very Tinker, Goblin, and that stuff's fine, but it's not really stuff I use all that much.
The Tinker stuff was last month. This month it's Lunar New Year and Valentine stuff.
Oh, geez, yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, I guess I haven't looked at it this month then. But whatever the case may be, the thing that I value are attendees because I buy so many of the little stuff. Almost all of my attendees every month go to the capes, the hood. You know what I mean? Because those I can use all the time. I find those pieces to be really, really plug and play interchangeable. But the other ones I tend not to care all that much about.
No, I know what you mean. The big ones for me this month was that there was a Lunar New Year Firecracker Flail, and I like the flails because they have like moving parts on the weapons.
I
Or
do
not-
like those flails, yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're not exactly moving; they're just kind of like loose, right? Like they're physics affected parts of the weapon. Um, and then there was like a set of. This is a very troll thing. I mean like troll the race in that.
Yeah.
There are a couple boots that actually cover troll feet. And so I always buy those because I like having options that cover the troll feet.
Yeah, I get that for sure.
Yeah. I would say like the only thing I log into WoW regularly for at this point is to do the Merildar fishing derby. And I am very close to getting my diving suit. Because I got my fish, I need the diving suit, and then I've got like all the lesser rewards to go for. But yeah.
Yeah, I am planning to get into it next week, obviously, with Undermine stuff, because I do want to do, sort of Undermine and all of that. I wonder how that plays. Can I just wait until the 25th, do a bunch of Undermine, and just complete my journal off of?
You might be able to.
That.
That's when you get the final push stuff, right? Like that's
Yeah.
And that, like I said, that's what I'm waiting for. So on the 21st, we'll get our final push quests, which are easier to complete and general. And I'm hoping it'll be enough to get me over the finish line to get the extra tendies. But
okay.
The part of it too is that like there were a bunch of like I got like a couple points from like Love Is in the Air stuff, but I think that ends like today or tomorrow. So
Sure.
Yeah, but yeah. Anything else before we get out of here?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, if you'd like to listen to any of the thing, or if you'd like to send us feedback on any of the stuff we talked about in the podcast, you can email subderpsgames@gmail.com, podcast@subderpsgames.com. You can follow us twitch.tv/subderpsgames or youtube.com/subderpsgames where these go out live. Rate, review us wherever you find podcasts. All links are in the description. But do you have anything you're looking to promote?
I already mentioned Cabernet is coming out in 3 days, so that, but that's it.
And on my side, I will say that one of my buddies that I play in person with put out an adventure path called The Potter's Curse. It's on Kickstarter right now. It is currently $23 short of its funding goal. It's got 13 days to go. So I'll put a link to that down in the description. I helped playtest this, so I think I've got like a special thanks credit in this. It was a pretty fun little adventure that I played, and it's $10 for the adventure, and it's got a low goal, so it's not like it's
Cool.
anything crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah. So recommendation to all my folks out there who like playing Pathfinder 2e. So yeah. All right. And with that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.